My own home was bombed in March 1992 by the IRA, a massive £1,000 bomb in the centre of Belfast. There was a bomb just on the outskirts of Belfast a couple of months later, all in 1992. So the IRA were still heavily involved in their bombing campaign, even though these exploratory talks were ongoing. But those were crucial. Those were really important when you think about Albert Reynolds bringing Gerry Adams together and John Hume together. John Hume vilified for doing so, even from some within his own party. But those talks were crucial in laying the foundations, I think, that eventually led to the talks happening in June 1996 that led to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998.
The Shankill bombing,
yes,
that nearly derailed all that was going on in the background. I mean, even though everything was secret, but
yes.
that particular bombing.
Yes, I remember it very well. The IRA had really been trying to take out Johnny Adair for quite some time. They viewed him as a maverick who was just out of control, basically. And there had been sort of some infighting, I think, within the UDA at that time as well about who had supreme power and what was going on. So in the IRA, that busy Saturday, it was the 23rd of October, 1983. My birthday's on the 22nd of October, so I'd been heading up the Shankill to my daddy's house, like I did every Saturday. And we were planning on having a little party for the kids and what have you. And I'd passed the fish shop about 1:30 p.m, which is the usual time on a Saturday I head up. And the IRA were targeting the UDA headquarters, which was above. And they ended up, killing so many innocent people. And then the retaliation after that, be it Loughin Island after that, and others. It was horrendous time. And if anybody had said to me then, loyalism, first of all, the IRA is going to call a ceasefire in a few months' time, and then loyalism a couple of months after that, I'd have told them to go away and get their head looked at. You'd have never ever thought that there was any sign of violence in, if you looked at 93 and the early months of 1994, because the IRA killed 2 police officers in Lurgan just a month before they called their ceasefire. So you'd really no idea that these were happening or that these were coming.
Then I suppose the big shock, the next thing that PUP and loyalism had to deal with was when we got into 96, we got George Mitchell in the chair. And then there was the realisation that these talks might have to include Sinn Féin. And this was the first time Sinn Féin were going to be at the table. And I think it's in fairness, when we look back in a historical context, that it was yourselves in the PUP that can realise that was going to happen, and wasn't it Gusty that said we're going to have to make that move? You might just bring us, because I know that was a big shock. I think people thought the talks were going to go ahead and Sinn Féin were not going to be there.
Yeah, if you remember, the IRA ended their ceasefire in February 1996 at Canary Wharf. And I remember talking to Gusty throughout the period when the ceasefires were called and until the IRA broke their ceasefire. There was discussions after discussions at Downing Street with John Major. Get a move on, call these talks, make them happen. And we know that then that the Tory party were in trouble. And of course, John Major was relying on votes from the Ulster Unionists at Westminster for his survival in government. And the Ulster Unions were holding out for decommissioning, which was never going to happen. There'd have been no decommissioning before talks. And then what turned out that there were going to be parallel decommissioning alongside the talks. And then it was, of course, no, we're just going to call elections to the talks and we'll talk about decommissioning later. So that was a tough time. The talks started in June 96 and I was a very politically naive 30-something. And Gusty saying to me the first day, right, we're all in now we need the Shinners in. And I was horrified and I went, are you mad? And he said, no, RSM, he called me, Regimental Sergeant Major. RSM, we need them in. I said, why do we need them in? He said, we need them in, need to see the whites of their eyes. He said, we need to lock them into the democratic process. He says, that's when the war will be over. Now, of course, it was going to be another 18 months or so of wrangling through procedures in the talks, lots of filibustering going on, you know, blood pressures high, red faces, people getting, you know, like showing fake anger throughout this whole period. But it wasn't until it was a change of government at Westminster and Labour was elected and Tony Blair came in that the IRA reinstated their ceasefire in July 97. So we knew then that there would be a period, if you like, of weeks before Sinn Féin would enter the talks. And as soon as Tony Blair indicated that Sinn Féin would be permitted to enter the talks, of course what happened? The DUP walked out. And the Ulster Unionists started to get really, really nervous about this. And we had umpteen meetings, PUP had umpteen meetings with David Trimble and a couple of other senior politicians within the party to say you can't...
The crossword meeting.
The crossword meeting, yes, the famous crossword meeting, where an MP who's renowned for his ill temper just sat and completed a crossword throughout the meeting. He was that interested in whether we should go back into the talks or not. And we were pushing really, really hard to say, you have the mandate from the people. You were elected to the forum, you were elected to the multi-party talks. Along with the PUP and UDP, you represent the majority within unionism in order to remain in there, in order to stay in. You have got to give this an opportunity. This is the best chance we have had since Sunningdale. You've got to stick in there. You've got to make this work.
I think it's not maybe recognised in a lot of the books and that crucial moment, because when Bob McCartney and Ian Paisley walked out, if the two loyalist parties, as small as you were in political democratic parties, but as significant as you were because of loyalism, that if you did not literally prop up the Unionist Party at that stage, the whole initiative was going to collapse.
Yeah.
I mean, if I recall it, you walked in shoulder to shoulder into those talks.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we knew that the price was too high. The price of peace, we needed to stay in there. It was the best opportunity we'd had, and we said to David Trimble, if it's a comfort to you in walking in together, we'll walk in. Now, we wanted to go in sooner than that. Yeah. You know, it was the talks process had begun like a week prior to that, and there was a lot of dithering going on, and we were saying, you know, make your mind up. Are you in or are you out? Are you in or are you out? And of course, at that stage, Trimble was running back and forward to people to say, you know, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And eventually they made the decision to go in, and we all went in together. And that was choreographed to down to the last second, I think, that we would enter Castle Biltons together, because we knew that the attacks would start from the DUP, and they did almost instantly. You know, we were being called traitors and Lundies. Dangerous talk within loyalist communities that previously would have led to people being killed, but that's the DUP turned then, and we were the traitors and the Lundies for staying in the talks. But I look back at that now, and I know there are individuals there, including myself, who would never have forgiven ourselves had we not pushed and pushed and pushed and made that happen.
I mean, you were under horrendous pressure. My good friend Ian was putting up the pressure on your party every way he could. But it must have been hard to withstand that last 2 or 3 weeks.
It was. If you remember, the UDA prisoners were getting extremely nervous, and Mo Molam went to visit the UDA prisoners in the maze, really to settle them down and say, you know, this is going to be good, you know, for Northern Ireland. You really got to go with this. You really got to keep supporting your spokespeople in the UDP because they're doing a good job. So there was lots of nervousness around that time. I remember that communication was really key, because there was an awful lot of suspicion throughout loyalism. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening. And we were going to meetings day after day, night after night, just briefing people on what was happening, even when there was nothing happening, just to let them know, don't worry, we're there, we'll keep you abreast of everything, because suspicions were so high, tensions were so high, nerves were frayed, people were getting angry, wondering what was happening, afraid that they were going to be, sold out, or that there was going to be something agreed to that they could never live with. And I think certainly for the leadership of the PUP, it was, cooling heads and saying, look, just keep your head cool down. I remember David, his favourite poem was If by Rudyard Kipling, and he used to go into a corner and puff his pipe and recite Rudyard Kipling, and it was trying to keep people cool, trying to keep people calm. And then when Senator Mitchell set the date of it was actually the 9th.
It was a Holy Thursday.
It was a Holy Thursday. Yeah, it was the 9th. It was set, and we'd had a meeting with the joint chairs, and David and Gusty and I were just leaving the meeting, and David said to Senator Mitchell, "This agreement's going to come." And Senator Mitchell said, "Are you sure, Davy?" And he said, "Yes, it's going to come, and when it does, it'll come very quickly." And Senator Mitchell said to him, "David, if it comes and we get it," he said, "I'll buy you a case of champagne." And he was true to his word, but I'll tell you that another time. So those last few weeks were intense. I remember the administrator of the talks mentioning to David and I in the corridor that the whole of Kessel Buildings was creaking under the weight of PUP members. We had invited as many people as possible up there to observe, because there was such suspicion that people needed to see for themselves whether there was nothing going on or there was something going on. And thankfully we could accommodate them all. And every time we had a meeting, we came back into that meeting room and we explained what transpired in the meeting. We met with the Ulster Unionist Party. Ulster Unionist Party weren't meeting with Sinn Féin at the time. The only two parties that were meeting with Sinn Féin was the Women's Coalition and the Alliance Party. And the Women's Coalition, I have to say, were crucial throughout that period, because they met with every party. They had a bird's eye view of what was going on. They could look down from the balcony, see who was dancing, who wasn't dancing, and engage with everyone.
It was intriguing for me, the final stage of negotiations, to hear all the noise outside and the protests. And it was about an hour before I realised that the protest was Paisley's group, but the people who were shouting them down were the PUP.
That's right.
And that was fascinating. It also gave me confidence to keep going that night, because I realised it wasn't so simple. But that must have been a tough decision for the PUP to actually go out there and to really take the rug from under his feet.
Yeah, there was a growing anger, I think, within the PUP and within loyalism, that the DUP and the way the DUP had treated the PUP, like something they would scrape off the sole of their shoe. And David, I remember, had been up ladders in a hut doing a live interview with the BBC at the time, and Gusty and I were inside the talks building watching this unfold on live TV, and David had been given an interview, and he'd just been saying that whilst the DUP wouldn't acknowledge the PUP, he was quite familiar with the colour of wallpaper inside some of their homes, and in other words, he was saying, I've been in their homes, I've talked to the DUP, but yet they won't recognise the PUP now. And as he was given that interview, of course, the DUP had marched, Ian Paisley had marched a pile of supporters up to Carson statue on the Stormont estate. He'd marched them all up, he'd got there, and then he told them all to go home, and there was boos and hissing and everything else when he'd said to them, go home. And inside the building, loyalists were saying, oh, here's the grand old Duke of York, he's doing it again. He's marching them up to the top of the hill and he's marching them down again. But the people left, but he and a delegation from his party then arrived at the gates of castle buildings demanding to be let in, and the administrator let them in because they wanted to have, their 5 minutes of fame in the press hut. So the press gathered, and it started to be shown on TV, and the next minute members of the PUP were in the back of the press hut heckling Paisley and telling him his time was done, that he was yesterday's man, that they were dinosaurs, that they basically needed to go away. And David came out of the press hut at the top of the ladder, slid down the ladder like a fireman, straight over to the back of the press hut, and started physically pulling PUP people out of the press hut to say, let them have their 5 minutes, let them have their 5 minutes. But I think for me that was a real turning point. That was when loyalism said to the DUP, you're not going to use us again. You're not going to wind people up so that they'll go out and do your dirty work. Because people used to say that Paisley was the best recruiting sergeant there was for paramilitarism on both sides. So that was a real turning point, I think, in the talks. And a lot of, you could feel it in the air, actually, inside castle buildings, that Paisley done us a favour coming up there, because it made loyalism and unionism more determined than ever that we needed to reach this agreement.
Yeah, it applied to us all.
Yes.
We decided that night that, you had taken a brave stand, so we needed to move it.